Hello there, the Revo deity here from the Mechanical Puzzle and Revomaze Discord server, here to talk about the infamous Revomaze puzzle. So this is the first of many videos in Revomaze series that I'm putting together to help explain the various aspects of the puzzle. So not only is the puzzle complicated itself, but some of the internals are complicated as well, or complex as well. So if you don't understand anything about this puzzle, it'd be challenging to disassemble it first, even if you have solved it. So this first video is going to go over what the puzzle is, kind of the objective, some miscellaneous terms, the difference between a V1, V2, and V3 puzzle. The second video that we're going over is how to solve it, some mapping techniques. Then the third and fourth will be how to disassemble a V1 and reassemble. The fourth would be disassembling and reassembling a V3 Revomaze. And then we'll probably have a fifth video doing kind of a live Q&A to answer any miscellaneous questions. So with that said, let's jump in. So what is a Revomaze puzzle? So the Revomaze puzzle is a blind maze puzzle, or explicitly it's a sequential movement puzzle where you have to make specific movements in order to navigate the maze inside here. So this is the starting position. The goal of the puzzle is very similar to that what you'd kind of see on a maze like a kid's menu with crowns. You have to make it from one end to the other. So the object is, I'm just gonna reach in here. So from the starting position, you have to navigate the internal maze to get the dots to line up right there. Let's see if it focuses. There's a dot on the sleeve here and a dot on the core. So the object is to navigate and get into this end position here where the dots are lined up. Put that back. So to kind of explain the different visible parts to the Revomaze here, so I'll pick one up here. So we have this outer part here, which is known as the sleeve. We have this inner part here, this larger cylinder known as the core, and then this smaller cylinder here known as the drawbar. And then, so it's kind of essentially three main components. The fourth that you can't see is there's a pin inside here. So those are kind of the four main components that are part of a Revomaze. So that pin is held in place by a spring. And here's actually a rough diagram since you can't see the internals. So this one makes it tricky when you first start a Revomaze because you can't see precisely what's going on. So conceptually it can be hard to grasp. So there is this pin that's held in place by a spring that puts pressure on it, which navigates the maze. So the core is complexly machined with various paths for you to navigate. And these paths have different elevations that you have to navigate accordingly, which is kind of the fun part about it. So I'll go ahead and pick up the bronze here. So this is the starting position here, and this first part here is what's called the reset ring. So you can only turn it one way, and you kind of hear a ramp. You can't turn it clockwise. You can only turn it counterclockwise here at starting based on where the label is. So you have to turn it. And here's an example where you hit a path. I can't turn it to the right here, but then if you keep listening, you'll hear that click. So what happened was that pin dropped in elevation, and I hit a trap, and I had to kind of go back and reset it. So you have to make those precise movements in a certain order to navigate the maze. So there's various walls and ramps that you have to navigate, again, in kind of that sequential movement. So with the basics of the Revomaze, you'll see that there are different colors here. So each color technically is a different maze. So there are, roughly 3 different categories on the website. So there's a beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Man, I have to apologize. Oh, I'm out of breath here. That darn COVID and still lingering. So even just by talking, I'm out of breath. So there's a beginner series, intermediate, and advanced. They're just kind of grouped together in various difficulties, but honestly, I really can't find anything that really divides the 3 categories. So like here's a couple of beginner mazes here. And they typically tend to be static. And I guess that's more important. Rather than beginner, intermediate, and advanced, there are essentially 3 different categories of mazes. So the beginners here are typically static, which means the maze does not change. It is pretty straightforward, just a standard maze. So you'll see walls, traps, etc. The intermediate series, like this bronze here, for example, typically the intermediate are dynamic mazes. So dynamic mazes is like that, the definition of the word, which means constant change. So in a dynamic, in my opinion, Usually there's a wall or like a path, and you have to go in a certain movement and trigger something to change the path. So for example, some of these you may experience a door that you have to open somehow. So you have to navigate a certain part of the maze and you'll open that door. So what once could be a wall could then be a path. So that's essentially the second definition, that dynamic. There's a third category, which is a little confusing, known as stamatic. Now, to kind of reiterate here, this video doesn't have any spoilers, so any descriptions that I'm discussing on are based on the website. So, for instance, I think gunmetal, right here is a stamatic maze. The definition of stamatic isn't really, I guess, publicized, but in my mind, what it is you could think of it like a house. Rather than certain components that you have to move. It's almost like you're accessing like a second or third story of a house. So typically, I think stamatic, and this is again on the website, they will typically defined by ball bearings on the inside. So you have to maybe hold it in a certain orientation such that you're accessing that second or third part of the house. So it's different with a dynamic maze, which kind of you have to do an action to change the maze or trigger that mechanism. Whereas stamatic, it's more of a certain orientation, more or less, to kind of get to that other part of the maze. So if that kind of makes sense. So stamatic, again, isn't, I don't think it's going to, they're, again, provide comments in the YouTube video comments, but that's kind of my ad hoc definition of stamatic. So you're not just finished when you have the dots lined up here. So the actual core itself can be removed like I've shown here, and I've covered the mazes up to avoid any spoilers. So once you remove the core, you can access typically a certificate, and that's technically the end of the puzzle. And it's at this point, once the core is removed, really when you have the difference in what you've heard of as maybe as a V1, V2, or V3 Revomaze. So there's various definitions. The metal ones you hear are what are called extreme Revomazes. The definitions had switched over the years, but if you hear of an extreme Revomaze, that means that the sleeve here is made out of metal and typically have the metal core as well. The Obsession series, which I have one shown here, is typically plastic core, plastic sleeve, and they don't have the drawbar typically. Some of them you could take out, some of them you can't, but I'll get to that in the future videos. So I'm going over the definitions of V1, 2, and 3 with respect to the extreme or metal series here. So kind of jumping into that, you could tell the difference almost immediately between a V1, 2, and 3 by, I guess, first off, you could tell by the sleeve. So here's a picture of a V2, which is the rarest. They don't typically make them actively, and they're not really easy to find. I don't think they were, I guess, widely enjoyed by the community. The definitive feature of this is you have the smooth sleeve on the outside. And I don't have one myself, but I don't believe you can access the certificate as well. The certificates were not included. So it's pretty easy to notice a V2 at first glance. But coming back to a V1 and V3, you could more easily tell once you have the cores removed, but just by looking at it, here I have a V1 here, and the easiest way to tell if it's a V1 at first is that this drawbar here, it's kind of hard to see, you'll kind of get close, could actually move slightly, okay? But with the V3, you'll notice that drawbar, this piece, actually doesn't move at all. It's almost completely rock solid. And that's because the core itself is different. So the V1 here, and I'll go ahead and pick up this one here, and I'll try to cover the maze. So that's the V, that's actually the V3. So the V1 here is all one single piece here. And then you have the drawbar, which is another piece entirely. So this is all one piece. And that's, I guess, the definitive feature of the V1. So you may see there are different types of plating for the V1. So, on my left here, I've got a handmade, and this is made of brass. But this drawbar here, you'll see this one solved, comes out. So I guess that's the definitive feature of a V1. You may have different platings on it. The standard is the one shown here, where this is actually all brass, but it's nickel plated. So nickel plating provides a kind of a stronger outside boundary for the maze, which makes it more durable and also a little bit more smoother for the pin to navigate. So the V3 here, and I'll try and get a little bit up closer for this, it's not actually one piece. So the maze itself here, try and focus on that, maybe. A little bit closer. So the autofocus, come on. The V3 here, the maze itself is actually a separate piece made of brass, and there's actually a set screw that holds it in place. And this main part of the core here is stainless steel, and then you have the brass maze here. The V1's actually had 2 pins in it, and you'll kind of see this more in the disassembly videos. There's a pin that navigates the maze, and then an actual pin that holds that drawbar in place. So you have to remove 2 pins to get that drawbar out. But with the V3, there's only 1 pin that navigates the maze, and then again you have that hole here, and that's actually to remove this piece here to access the certificate and remove the maze there. So I'll go over that in subsequent videos that kind of show the full disassembly of a V1 and a V3 later. So that concludes the first video of the Revomaze that I wanted to talk about, kind of introduce you to a few of the terms, show you kind of a rough up-close video of the different cores. So in the next video that I'll talk about, we'll talk about mapping techniques and kind of how to solve it. Some people solve these by memory, others like myself, we have kind of a toolkit of various pens, rulers to kind of write the maze on a paper, which can be pretty intricate, especially when you have the various dynamic parts and ramps. Here's also, we'll talk about a next video, actually the 3rd or 4th, about disassembling the cores, which is used for the V3. So, I love this puzzle. It's very rewarding, and this is one of the reasons I think it has a large cult following. Some of these, especially like the silver here, can take hundreds of hours to solve. So you really get your time out of, or the solve time out of the price you pay for them. And it's not like you're spending 20 to 30 hours stuck. You're kind of making these small incremental discoveries, which is like these small little rewards along the way. And then once you do solve, it's such a incredibly rewarding experience. So like I said, there's the cult following, and we were actually pretty active. Myself, I'm one of the admins on what's shown here is kind of the Revomaze Discord server. I'll have a link in the video description for anyone that's interested in joining and being part of the community. Feel free to reach out to me on there. My handle's RevoDeity. And on there, you can contact me. What I do is I have a friend that helps me print these grippers, and that comes with hardware to tighten it around the core, and also various stands. You have vertical and the horizontal stands here. I typically give them away for free if you're in the U.S. Outside of the U.S., if you could just pay for shipping. I shipped these to help out. I find that with these grippers on the end here, makes it a lot easier to navigate on your hands once you've kind of spent 30 to 40 hours on them, like shown here on salmon. But if you have any questions, feel free to add them in the comments of the YouTube video. I'll try and address them in future videos. By the end of the series here, this is kind of a custom wood stand that I made. I'll be giving away one of these for free as well. The community is pretty good and been pretty helpful to me, especially kind of helping me find and grow my collection here. And you'll see there's different grippers that we'll be talking about too in future videos and all kinds of aspects. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments of the YouTube video. Forgive me as I recover from COVID here, and out of breath from talking. This is kind of a good intro video to kind of the mazes and the puzzles themselves. So hope you enjoy, and look forward to seeing you in future videos. Thank you.